Thank you for joining us for another edition of Behind the Editor's Curtain with Don Corrigan. Each edition focuses on points of interest relating to the environment and the community. And now, here's Don.
Okay, we're talking today with Patricia Schuba of Labadie Environmental Organization, or LEO. And LEO has been very involved and very concerned with coal ash from coal-fired electricity plants in Missouri, particularly the Labadie plant, but this is a concern that obviously is both state and national. So, Patricia, tell us a little bit about LEO. How did that get started? Isn't that an example of an organization that's truly grassroots?
It is, and it's an amazing thing and maybe a rare thing. We hope not so rare. But the community came together after having conversations that started in a book club, a local book club. And Labadie is a lot like many of the rural communities across the state of Missouri, where people know each other pretty well, and they come together for other reasons to talk about things that may have nothing to do with coal ash, but that allows people to exchange information. So it started there. People started talking about it in the women's book club, and then from there, a larger group of people in the area became involved. And really, over a matter of maybe 2 months, the organization came together, became a nonprofit in the state of Missouri, and then started talking to others about legal options for opposing the citing of a huge, huge proposal.
Well, that's kind of unique. Did you, as a book club, read some books related to this issue? And if not, do you recommend some books that some people might want to read?
Actually, I don't believe the book club had discussed environmental issues very much. It was a typical book club. But what happens at these book club meetings is we get together and we eat a lot of great food. Everybody brings something, and there's a lot of conversation. And then maybe half of the meeting is about the book. So in the course of working on this issue, I think people have brought up different books to discuss now that are a little meatier and about issues, including environmental issues and others. And of course, we would love to review your book at one of those meetings. We plan them out about a year in advance, and I think we're up to maybe around 20 people who attend those meetings. And they're not just from Labadie. We include people from St. Albans, Washington, and across the area. Even I think some people from Augusta have attended. So it's actually a great example of maybe what has replaced some of the community meetings that used to happen a long time ago in small communities like ours.
What is coal ash, and why do we need to be concerned about coal ash? Where does it come from, and where does it go?
Well, coal ash is what is left after you burn coal for energy. So the United States in particular, in general, and Missouri in particular, are pretty dependent on coal for generating energy. So we produce a lot of this waste that's left over after you burn it. Some of it drops out of the chamber and is a little larger and looks almost like gravel size, and other particles are really, really small and actually go up the stack and are emitted out of the stack into the atmosphere, which we breathe every day. In the United States, we produce about 160 million tons of this waste, and that number's probably gone up since the last projections. And in the state of Missouri, we're roughly 70 to 80% dependent on coal. We produce a lot of it, and Labadie happens to be the largest plant, so we produce the most there. But it's what's left over after the burning of coal for energy.
So I'm reading there's about 1,000 of these coal ash waste sites across the country, maybe even more than that. What is a coal ash pond, and how effective is it in sort of neutralizing that as a pollutant?
It's a very arcane way of disposing of waste. It is similar to the old waste ponds that were used for human waste. So you dig out a location and you begin to just dump the material in the pond. Over time, the watery portion of the waste, which is used to sluice it out into the pond, evaporates, and you have concentrated amounts of this coal waste, which contains arsenic and other nasty chemicals that are linked to cancers and immune disorders and other things. So there has to be a better way, and that's where the coal combustion waste discussion began almost 30 years ago was, how do we handle this waste? If we're going to burn coal, what do we do with the waste?
So I've
still have these ponds.
So I've read that there's like 44 disease-causing chemicals in this, like arsenic, mercury, lead, chromium-6, boron. What do these chemicals do?
And radioactive chemicals.
I mean, what do they do to you? Why do people need to be worried about them?
Well, because they're extremely water-soluble. So these chemicals dissolve in the water, and then water comes in contact with it, and it moves into drinking water. So the worst, and this is what we said from the very beginning of our fight in Labadie, average people knew that putting this material that had these constituents in it near water was the worst idea ever. So what the current practice is to build it to build these ponds or landfills in a very convenient location for the utility, which happens to be right next to them, where it takes less effort to sluice it to a pond or put it in a landfill. But it's the worst location from a biological and community perspective because it's in contact with water. So floodplains filter our drinking water. That's what they do. They're located near rivers where water that drops on the landscape above that area filters down to it eventually, and then it's filtered into the river. And the water levels in floodplains fluctuate with the levels of water in a river. So in the case of Missouri, a good 60% of people get drinking water from the Missouri River. In combination with our other major rivers in the region, those are our water sources. So it never made sense that the state regulators would approve a landfill or certainly another pond in these locations, given what we know about the science of these chemicals. But the problem is we've always done it that way. So that's what we were up against, was changing the paradigm. And we at least got it as far as, building up the site and keeping it hopefully out of the water. But the danger is they're very soluble in water, and then they're easily consumed by us and other things.
It's pretty bizarre that we take so much pride in our Missouri and Mississippi River heritage in Missouri, and yet we've been using them as storm sewers and for sewage and for chemical waste for years.
Absolutely. That is the irony, because we have a cultural link to the rivers, and we also have economic links to the rivers. So our success as a region has been the proximity to the river. And so I think people are starting to get that, and that's filtering up to politicians and to regulators who impact these decisions the most, but it takes time. So people need to stay engaged, and they need to work on things that are extremely relevant to them. So in the case of the largest power plant in the state producing the largest amount of this waste, and an active proposal, that was where our community came together and pushed back. But there are other communities, as you mentioned, around the Merrimack plant, around the Rush Island plant, the Sioux plant up in North County. These are all areas where people who live near those sites need to get educated about what's happening there so they can have a voice. And the one amazing thing that happened out of our advocacy, which is there's been very little talk about it, is the 7-0 decision at the Supreme Court level. We took one of our cases all the way to the Supreme Court of Missouri, and our attorneys won that case. And that case said that the public is key, and their input is key into the decisions that are made by the people who represent us. So that sent a message to county commissions like ours, and to state representatives and senators, and the governor of the state, and his appointed people at DNR, that really the people are the folks that you're trying to protect. And they're at the top of the decision tree. So that was something amazing that happened, and it should give hope to other people living around these sites or in the region that what they say matters. And if they just say it enough and say it loud enough, it can make a difference.
So you've been dealing, and Leo's been dealing with politicians and elected officials for several years in this fight. Tell me some anecdotes or some highlights and lowlights of dealing with politicians and elected officials trying to sort of increase their awareness of this issue.
Well, it's really interesting because you get mixed messages from politicians, and I think that's the nature of politics. So
You mean they talk out of both sides of their mouth?
Exactly. Or they take different positions depending on the type of pressure they're getting. And the one, and this is not just politicians, but of course people who represent us at the agency. So whether it's the EPA at the federal level or DNR at the state level, or people who work in offices at your local county level. And so they're empathetic. This is the thing. They're empathetic. There seems to be an understanding that this is not the best way to handle something like a pollutant, but then it's very difficult for them to make that change. And there's a lot of structural things in place that allow them to make the other decision. So what was really hard for me to accept, and I don't consider myself really naive, is that you can present the facts and bring the people to the table to say there's a better decision to be made, but it needs to be a concerted effort over a fairly long period of time. Mm-hmm. And one person from the EPA, a retired person from the EPA, had worked their entire life for the EPA at the federal level, told me in some communications that these things don't change quickly, and for every time you talk to me or come to see me, I've seen someone from industry at least 10 or 12 times more. So they're in contact with those agencies all the time, almost like lobbyists, and then you think by seeing me once a year or twice a year or even 4 times a year that you can have the same impact, because you need to know that this is the type of pressure they place on our regulators and on the politicians who determine who is, like, say, the head of the Department of Natural Resources. So that was an enlightening conversation.
So what does that mean for a small grassroots organization like yours? Do you need to ally with Sierra Club or another organization that has regular lobbyists in Jefferson City?
I think, well, what we did is we joined 2 other organizations, Missouri Coalition for the Environment and Renew Missouri, to have a lobbyist in Jeff City. So we allocated some funds to be able to do that for 3 years. And that did make some inroads, and we have allies with reasonable politicians on both sides of the aisle that are interested even in a coal combustion waste law for Missouri. But that takes years, because it's about building trust with those people, and a lot of the funding and support, and even more, the pressure comes from the utilities and their industry organizations, which are well-funded. So, yeah, we worked always across a platform of organizations. We were always ourselves and didn't get co-opted by anybody, but we worked certainly together with other organizations to get a message out, because I do believe, and many people believe, that the voice of the public is the most important voice. It's the most crucial voice, and it does make people move on issues.
That's a really interesting point that you make, because I know a lot of college students feel like, well, I went to a rally in Jeff City, why didn't things change? And you're saying it's really a long haul, day-to-day, week-to-week situation of having lobbyists and having a voice constantly present.
Right, and I think politicians and decision makers want to help communities, but if they think you're not going to be around very long and the utility will always be there, that must be a pressure to not do as much on an issue. So I think to show staying power and concern, honest concern, and to get the voices from the communities to Jeff City, in our case, to speak with regulators. And we took people from our community all the way to Washington, D.C. to talk to regulators at that level. I remember a conversation with the then director of the EPA, and we were in a room with maybe 20 people. And I took a map of the Labadie site as it was first designed, and I said, this is in a floodway of the Missouri River, this close to the Missouri River, crops growing around it. And she leaned forward and looked at me and said, that is unbelievable. Now, that was the head of the federal EPA. So people get it, but to actually make that translate into a decision like don't put coal combustion waste, landfills, and floodplains takes a lot of work. And it takes partnering. We partnered with Earth Justice, Environmental Integrity Project, Clean Water Action. I can't even count the number of talks that I gave and workshops that we went to just to get that level of awareness that things were happening in the Midwest, not just on the coast where there were large damage cases. So, but we can do that. You can do that as part of a nonprofit. There's just people coming together. We never got a grant to do any of that work. So we just did it because we knew it's what we needed to do.
I hope I don't sound sexist against men or women with this question, but when I deal with activists as a media person on so many issues, it seems like women are so involved and they're often the majority in so many of these situations. How do you explain that? Do women care more? Are they more nurturing? Is it a matter of time? What is it?
I think it might be a mixture of things, which include the sort of need to take care of future generations. At least we've had this conversation internally within our group. Usually sort of the backbone of organizations are women, and then we have key people that participate who are men. Mm-hmm. So in the case of our organization, our board, it's about half and half, but that was through a lot of effort to bring other people in. I think the women in our group are generally more hopeful, less likely to not speak up, and are more concerned about the implications for other people and future generations. So we knew at Labadie there was an impact to local groundwater, but we also were concerned about people downstream and other people who may be impacted by the same situation that we were going through. So we always saw ourselves as part of a larger group. And sometimes that doesn't often happen with the other sex. So it's about what can we do right now to fix this problem right here. And we saw our fight as more of a long-term fight.
Yeah.
Even very early on, we talked to communities like the community of Pines, Indiana. There was a woman who headed up that organization and brought together a group of people, and they went to Chicago for the coal combustion waste hearings, and we took about 5 or 6 people in a car and went up to those hearings as well. And so we were, I think it's just a natural thing to reach out and ask, what did you do? What worked?
Yeah, I don't want to sound I don't want to sound gender biased against men, but it amazes me how much better informed and active women are on so many of these causes. And then you look at the Congress and you look at the state legislature, and women are such a distinct minority in America. And I'm sure that's a hurdle that you also have to deal with when you're dealing with legislators or the Congress.
Absolutely. At times I felt like a little girl sitting in the chair in front of this powerful person who had no idea about what I was talking about, and that happened with state legislators. So you have to overcome that hurdle and convince them that you know enough and that it's important enough for them to take a risk to support you. I think women should hold more of those positions because, again, I think we think longer term and we think more holistically about an issue. And we're also really good at communicating and convincing people to care and working together with other people. It's not a competition, it's a collaboration. And Leo was an example of that. It was a collaboration amongst people in the community. And so I think we have a lot to offer, and I hope more women are elected to Jeff City and to the Congress, U.S. Congress, because I think it would more reflect the public and the public's interest.
Sure. So just a couple more questions. And one is, how would you grade the media in all of this? How did they cover this issue for you? What were the high points and the low points when it comes to media coverage?
Well, I think, and it's interesting because we had both. We had and at differing times, differing responses to our plea for coverage. So on the local level, it took a while for the local paper to cover the issue in the way that we thought was more reflective.
So are you talking about the Washington Missourian in that case, or?
Right. So very early on, I think sort of the natural human tendency is to stay far away and wait until something plays out, and that's what we sort of experienced with the media coverage. So when at our first hearing we had 300-400 people there, that was never highlighted in the coverage, and that was very frustrating because we felt like that was the amazing thing that happened, that so many people were concerned about it. But then as we got further along with the local coverage again, it got better. They started asking harder questions of the commissioners who were making the decision and of the attorney that represented them. So in the end, we got fairly decent coverage locally. Now, the further you get away from where something is happening, I think the more objective media can be and more hard-hitting media can be on all the facts, whether it be our side or their side.
Sure.
And so the Post-Dispatch did a great job. Some of the national coverage we had was very good. And we actually even had coverage internationally once. So I think what was important about our story is that it wasn't just about Labadie. It was about the nation and how we were handling this issue of coal ash and how it was playing out in Congress and in the EPA. So sort of astute local reporters understood that and talked about it in that framework. Mm-hmm. And others kept it very local, and that this is not a big issue, and this is what Ameren says, and this is what the small group of community
so the he
people
said, she
think
said
about
kind
it.
of reporting that goes on so often. Let me ask you this. For Leo, how do you judge your success in this fight, and where does Leo go from here?
I think we judged our success in that we kept the waste out of the water, which was the primary risk, or at least we hope we have, and that we protected the floodplain from future exploitation by dumping of coal waste. I think also we had our annual meeting a couple weeks back. Everyone came. Everyone felt good about the decision, about moving forward. And one of the plaintiffs had said to me at one point, what do we do next? That's how I measure success. That people had a part of the process, we got some key concessions, and that people haven't walked away. And so Leo will continue on. We're taking on other issues related to coal combustion waste in that floodplain. And we've reached out to other communities across Missouri to hopefully give them hope that things can change. So we completed this past year a statewide tour on coal waste, and we showed some films and we brought in some speakers. And there's an interest across the state in managing this waste better and thinking about our rivers and water as a key resource for the state of Missouri. So I think we feel good about what we accomplished, and we're hoping we can continue to work on things and be a model of an all-community, all-volunteer type nonprofit in the state of Missouri.
Sure,
So
I know there's a lot of concern here in the St. Louis area about what will happen when they decommission the Ameren plant in Oakville, and I know that they've formed an organization as well. And I wouldn't be surprised if their residents didn't take a cue from Leo.
And our groups have been meeting since the beginning, so we drive over to Oakville for their meeting and sort of share our experience. And they've participated in some of our hearings. So I think, there's a camaraderie between the different communities. And I think that's important because you don't want to start from block one ever. You want to have as much information as you can. Like we went to speak with people in Indiana. I actually drove to Indiana to speak with some folks there. You learn from other people. And again, that's a very collaborative model of problem solving. Mm-hmm. And so I think we'll continue to work across the region with folks and let them know what works and what doesn't.
Well, thanks for your time today. We've been talking with Patricia Schuba of the Labadie Environmental Organization, or LEO, and we'll be looking forward to seeing where LEO goes from here. So thanks very much, Patricia Schuba.
Thank you, Don.
This is Don Corrigan for Environmental Echo. I hope you enjoyed our interview today. Have a good green day, folks.